I watched the 2-hour Vice TV documentary on Chyna, Joanie Laurer, which is one of the saddest things that I've ever seen. This was a woman who attained superstardom in a relatively short period of time. She got cheated on by the love of her life and then was effectively blackballed from the company that she called home. And everything just seemed to spiral out of control from there. And what's worse is that she didn't have the support system that she really needed to climb out of it. She was surrounded by enablers who just leached off of her up until the day she died. She had her demons, there's no doubt about that. I mean, they're very well documented. She had her issues. She had her sense of what her worth was, which is what led to WWE letting her go. You know, whether she was actually worth $1 million a year is something that can be debated. They said that she wanted Steve Austin level money, which is ridiculous. And I cannot fault WWE for not seeing her at Steve Austin level, because almost nobody, except maybe The Rock later on, was at Steve Austin level in that company. Steve Austin was a star that just transcended the company and transcended the business. There was nobody else like him at that time. Her sister, who was interviewed for this special, said that, and this was in an interview she did a few years ago, and Jim Ross has since confirmed this as well, that the company had offered Chyna a new deal in 2001 to keep her, where she would make no less than $400,000. So I guess $400,000 would have been the base salary that she would have made, with the potential for a lot more money between pay-per-view money and merch sales, and she turned it down. She wanted a base salary of $1 million. And when it comes to dollars and cents, you know, relative to what she was doing on television at that time, yeah, that sounds ridiculous. But consider this. Consider this. Had there been a healthy WCW at that time, or an AEW like there is today, where it wasn't all that long ago that WWE was throwing around just these types of outrageous numbers at people like FTR and Gallows and Anderson just to keep them from going to AEW. If there was anyone else around that time 20 years ago, Chyna probably could have gotten herself a $1 million deal to stay with WWE. Or something close to that. Because I don't think they would have wanted to lose her to their competitor. She was a big enough name still that I don't think they would have wanted to lose her to someone else. But there was no one else. So they didn't have to worry about losing her to anyone. Timing is everything. And the fact that WCW and ECW both went out of business that year, you know, TNA and Ring of Honor didn't even exist until the following year. She sort of fell into this donut hole where there was nowhere else in wrestling for her to go to make that kind of money that was even comparable to what WWE could pay her. She could go do Playboy, and she did. She could do porn, and she did many years later and make a lot of money really quickly. But in wrestling in 2001, it was WWE, and that was it. And you just watch this documentary, and 15 years go by. 15 years where she just falls deeper and deeper into this hole. You know, they had footage of her wrestling Masahiro Chono in New Japan. They had a competitive match. But she didn't stick around, and then TNA brought her in. And they didn't mention this, but TNA did bring her in once. They did bring her in for a pay-per-view match in 2011, and she was gone quickly after that. I don't recall what the reason was, if it was a money issue or if it was just agreed upon that she would do one match and that was going to be it. But she came in and she was gone right after. Outside of those two things, she was completely out of wrestling for those 15 years. Because she was never going to get the same kind of money that she thought she should be paid in WWE. But Mick Foley was interviewed, as was Vince Russo, who I thought came across better in this documentary than any of the Dark Side of the Ring episodes or any other documentary I've ever seen him in. And they both said, you know, the saddest thing may have been that, or one of the saddest things, was that she died not fully realizing the impact that she had on a lot of people. and a lot of female fans, some of whom are now wrestlers, because she was such a huge star when they were growing up, and they looked up to her. They sort of idolized her and wanted to be just like her. They wanted to be the next Chyna. And she never really understood how much love there was for her, in part because WWE didn't want to have anything to do with her. It's like being cut out of the will. When you're out, you're out. Out of sight, out of mind. And WWE had many reasons to not want to do business with her later on because the woman was a fucking train wreck. Let's just call it what it is. You don't have to dance around it. There were several years there where the woman was a fucking train wreck. You see it in the documentary. She was out of control. She was drinking, she was taking pills, she was on celebrity rehab at her worst. She was making all sorts of accusations about Triple H and Sean Waltman. And her and Waltman, you know, he's interviewed too, and they had a completely toxic relationship. They were both doing drugs and hiding it from each other at the same time. But, you know, at one point she accused Triple H of physical, like domestic abuse and stuff, which I think she may have eventually apologized for. But, like, there was just a lot of shit that was said and a lot of shit that she was doing. I don't blame WWE for not wanting to bring her back when she was like that. But if she would have gotten the help that she needed, she might still be here today. Can never be sure. I can't sit here and say, oh, Chyna would still be alive if she would have just gotten help. Maybe she would be, maybe she wouldn't. Maybe she would have fallen off the wagon again. We see it time and time again. You look at people like Scott Hall and Jake Roberts and Tammy Sitch, and you want them to get their shit together and get their life back on track and do well, but they just keep falling off. That's why it's so cool to see Jake. And I think even Scott, and they both still fall off the wagon every now and then, or Scott does, but they're definitely in a better place now than they were years ago. You know, when you're an addict, you have to want to help yourself. Jake Roberts has talked about this. You have to want help. DDP did not hit him over the head with a frying pan and drag him to his crib in Atlanta. Jake had to want to move into that house with him and put the work in. Chyna seemingly wanted to be helped. She said as much in some of the documentary footage. But she was surrounded by people who were more interested in shooting their fucking movie than actually wanting to get her clean and sober. Because clean and sober doesn't make for an interesting documentary, I guess. The footage they used was from the aborted Chyna documentary that never got finished. It never got released officially, but they had a ton of unused footage. And she was filming this documentary at the time of her death. So they had a lot of really good footage in here, tough as it was to watch. But until now, people had never really seen all of this video. They had early footage of her on the independent scene from 1995. That was tremendous. I had never seen that before. And she looked like a totally different person. I thought she looked great. I mean, she looked like if they would have had a strong women's division back then, she would have been the #1 star. I thought that some of that footage was the best stuff on here. It talked about how she approached Triple H at the gym one day about possibly being a bodyguard for him. You cannot understate how important that Chyna character was to Triple H's career. Chyna helped make that man a star. And maybe he would have ended up right where he is anyway and fallen for Stephanie. Maybe all of that would have happened no matter what. But Triple H was a mid-card guy on the roster until Chyna came along and their act just clicked. It just worked. It was money. And it helped elevate him to another level that up to that point, in the couple of years he had been in that company, and the curtain call didn't help. He got punished for that. But up to that point, he was at a certain level and he wasn't really getting any higher. And until Chyna came in, that's what really elevated him. Okay, now we can move up a level. It's like being in a video game, right? You start on level 1, you want to get to level 10, but you're stuck on level 3 and you don't know what to do. Chyna comes along and now she helps get this guy up to level 5 or 6. She was an important part of his career. And then he fell in love with Stephanie and it all fell apart. You know, the heart wants what the heart wants, I guess. But it was a tough spot for her to be in when you get dumped for the boss's daughter. I mean, how do you overcome that awkwardness? Now we know that Triple H and Stephanie were together through a good part of 2000, but they talk in the documentary, it wasn't until a year in that Chyna, found a love letter that Stephanie had written to him, and that's kind of when everything came to a head. I mean, you talk about being in an awkward spot. And, when you're looking at Stephanie and you're looking at Chyna and you're saying, well, who's the one that's going to be protected here in this situation? It ain't going to be Chyna. It's going to be Vince McMahon's daughter. That's who it's going to be. And I'm going to say something nice about Vince Russo, because he does come across in this special as someone who genuinely cared about Chyna and wanted to help her. One of the few friends that she had left. But her manager, Anthony, this guy comes across as just a total scumbag who exploited her. She comes back from Japan, where she went to Japan. She was living there for a while. She became a school teacher. She was teaching English to Japanese students. She comes back to the U.S., and they start to film the comeback tour, right? They start to film the documentary, and we're going to take Chyna back out on the road here, and he's got her doing Comic-Cons, and this woman is clearly not ready to be doing these events. She is not in a state mentally where she's ready for this and to be back out in front of fans. There was a really sad scene at one of the Comic-Cons where this woman walks up to Chyna at her table to get an autograph and just starts talking to her. And I'm looking and I'm like, oh, that's Ashley Massaro. So that was really sad to see the two of them together, knowing how both of their stories turned out. But he's got her doing all of these things. He takes her to her father's gravesite, right? To get over these demons, you've got to embrace your past and forgive people. And, he films her at the cemetery, and she's sitting there crying her eyes out at her father's gravesite. He tried to organize a reunion with her mother, who she hadn't seen in 30 years, and that ends up not happening because Chyna's a mess at the time. He and Chyna, they have this on film, are doing a fucking Skype call with Dr. Drew. I guess maybe that's from the Celebrity Rehab Connection from when she was on the show, but they're talking to Dr. Drew about needing more pills for her to take, and he's warning them that this combination of drugs can be lethal. It's a bad idea. And this guy keeps pushing to get the pills. He was a total enabler. Plain and simple. He was an enabler. You see the woman needs help now. You try to get her help now. Not when you're done with your film. And she's a grown woman. She can make her own choices. But when she came back from Japan, I think that if she had just had the right people around her and wasn't filming this stupid documentary, she would have had a fighting chance at cleaning herself up. Eric, the director of the film, ended up being charged with drug possession and distribution. He was a fucking mess. He at least admitted that he did nothing to try to save her. Because he too was a drug addict at the time. He could barely save himself, let alone her. At least he admits it. Anthony the Vulture got permission from Chyna's mother to cremate her daughter's ashes. Actually, let me back up a little bit here. Because if you recall, when Chyna passed away, it was Anthony. It was her manager here. Or as he says, her soulmate. You fucking break. Who goes to her apartment, right? Because no one's heard from her. Chyna's lawyer reached out and says, have you heard from Joanie? It's been days, I haven't heard from her. Nobody's heard from her. So what does he do? He takes the camera. He's got a camera person filming as he is entering the apartment and following him into the apartment. I'm pretty sure he has it on film when he discovered her body in her bedroom. That did not air on television. There was no way they would have aired that. But I believe it was filmed because the whole trip into the apartment to what he found was filmed. That's how this guy thinks. So now she's dead. And he gets permission from Chyna's mother to cremate her daughter's ashes, right? With 3/4 of them to be spread out in the ocean, and the rest would be sent to Chyna's mom. Instead, he kept half of the 3/4, I guess, that were supposed to be scattered, and then we had footage of him holding a memorial service for Chyna, where he placed the ashes in this bedazzled urn for fans to stand next to and take pictures. At her most vulnerable, she was surrounded by the worst type of people that she could have possibly surrounded herself with, who did absolutely nothing. They did the bare minimum to try to help this woman. And that was the saddest part of all. You know, her run was brief, where she really got hot in WWE and became a big name. It was brief. It was a brief run, but she made a lasting impact. And it's too bad that she's not around today, and not just around, but of sound body and mind, to fully appreciate that. And one more thing here, and we'll put a bow on this, because I was going to mention the fact that I had watched the latest WWE Most Wanted Treasures episode on Andre the Giant, which was also 2 hours, and I thought it was very well done. But they had they basically sent the AEW crew of Big Show and Mark Henry, along with old AJ Francis, out to go find certain Andre collectibles, right? They were looking for, his singlet, and they were looking for all kinds of, his passport and stuff. So anyway, they end up at Sonny Ono's house. You remember Sonny? If you were a WCW fan, you've probably heard of the name Sonny Ono. And they brought Sonny, and Sonny was a friend of Eric Bischoff's, and he was also an on-air manager. But apparently he's also an avid collector. And he came into possession, I assume he paid for it from someone, he bought it off someone many years ago, one of the rare masks that are still out there of Giant Machine. When Andre was doing this gimmick, there was a tag team called the Machines. WWE, they got the idea, I think, from Japan. And for a period of time when Andre in storyline was suspended, he would show up in this mask as Giant Machine. So they had the Machines, and he was Giant Machine. At one point, there was Hulk Machine. And you knew who it was. I mean, you knew who was under the mask. So there's a few of them. There's a few masks that are out there of Giant Machine that Andre wore, and Sonny Ono is in possession of one of them. And they desperately want to get the Giant Machine mask. So they go to Sonny Ono's house, and they find the mask, and there it is, and Mark Henry is getting all Mark Henry got emotional in every scene in this episode. I mean, I love Mark Henry, but it got comical. It got comical. Like, the name Andre would be mentioned, and Mark would have to excuse himself. Like, the tears would begin to flow. He's a very emotional person. He's a very emotional guy. Big Show, I thought, actually came off really well in this episode. He seemed genuinely interested in wanting to leave Sonny's house with that mask, but they come to find out that Sonny has organized an auction, and now they're going to have to bid against a couple of super fans, a couple of other collectors who also want to buy the mask. And so we have video, and I'll tell you how this connects to Chyna here in a second, but they are bidding against these random fans, and then finally, like, the bidding gets up to like 5,000. And they can't do it. I love it. I love how WWE, we're on a fixed budget here. We can't afford this. So they lose out on the auction to one of these fans. WWE, well, we can't go above this, budget cuts, I guess, right? They can't go above this number. And they go out to the car, right? Now they're really upset that they didn't get the mask. And they cut to AJ, who, is doing an interview explaining why he is so upset. And there's AJ on screen talking about how angry he is. Sonny Ono, this is not even his mask. It was Andre's mask, and he's being so greedy. He's profiting off of someone's legacy. He is appalled that Sonny Ono is profiting off of someone else's legacy. And I tweeted this out. I said, that is WWE's entire fucking business model. And this clown is getting upset that, oh, Sonny Ono, how could he do such a thing? What a terrible person. He's profiting off of the legacy of Andre the Giant. WWE constantly profits off the legacy of pretty much anybody who ever worked for them. And Chyna, if you'll remember a few years ago, is one of those people. And this is when, remember, WWE had no relationship with Chyna, although I think she had passed away by this point. It is funny how after she passed away, right, they suddenly became very open to putting out Chyna merch and putting her in the Hall of Fame as part of DX, right? They waited until she was dead, and then all of a sudden, oh, well, we're gonna celebrate the life of the ninth wonder of the world. They put out a fucking custom championship belt, a Chyna belt, because they make so much money off these replica belts. They profited off of her legacy. Somebody should go ask old AJ how he feels about that. Because he seemed genuinely upset about this. And I'm just thinking, dude, are you out of your fucking mind? Do you know who you work for now? Holy shit. I couldn't believe my ears. But otherwise, I thought it was a very enjoyable episode.